Hello and welcome to Highway, which this week comes from Romsey. But I have a small problem because everybody around here is calling it King's Markham. I think I'll ask this gentleman. He might help me. Excuse me, you look familiar. You're Inspector Wexford.
Ah, and you're Sir Harry Secombe.
Nice to see you. Perhaps you can help me with my inquiries about the town.
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, Sir Harry, because I've been investigating it too.
Have you? And what's the result of your investigation?
Well, first of all, I've been able to eliminate you from all suspicion.
Oh, that's a relief.
And secondly, King's Markham is only an alias. I can reveal now that this town is called Romsey.
I knew you'd solve it, George. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Do you mind? I've got a train to catch.
But of course.
Thank you.
George Baker, a star of ITV's Ruth Rendell Mysteries, here to film a new story for the series. We shall be seeing more of George later on in the programme. But of course, the real reason for coming to this busy market town, just a few miles northeast of Southampton, is to meet the people for whom this is home.
2 times 4 and 3 ginger crunch.
Romsey really comes to life as a community in regular weekly events like the Women's Institute Market, where homegrown produce tempts even the most diet-conscious. Oh.
Welcome to Romsey WI Market.
This week, too, the children of Romsey are still enjoying the celebration of Easter. The pupils of the Abbey School are very proud of their Easter garden. The great Abbey Church of St Mary and St Ethelfleda, which overlooks their garden, is a living sign to the whole town of the message of Easter. So, while the younger generation of Romsey prepare their Easter scene, let's hear the Romsey Abbey Choir with the seasonal anthem, Good Christian Men Rejoice and Sing. A 1,000 years ago, the first Christians who lived here were a community of nuns. The nunnery was almost cut off by marshy ground. But as the nobility sent their daughters here, there were at one time more than 100 nuns in the community. The abbess held considerable power in the town and complete power in the Abbey Church. Two people who love and care for the Abbey as it is today, the present vicar, the Reverend Neil Crawford-Jones, and Mrs. Aldith Wellington, who's known as Mrs. Romsey. Why are you known as Mrs. Romsey?
Well, Sir Harry, You see, I was the first woman mayor of Romsey, and they kept me for 3 years, and I've been connected with a great many appeals, and I was president of the horse show. Also, I'm third generation Romsonian, my grandfather having been the first county councillor. But between you and me, I think it's because I'm a bit of a bossy boots.
I shan't ask you anything about that, Neil.
No.
Now, tell me, what does the Abbey mean to you?
It means a very great deal to me. It's the place where I begin every working day, and it's a wonderful place to come into and say your prayers.
You live close to the Abbey. Do you feel close to it spiritually, too?
Very, very. I was baptized in the Abbey, confirmed in the Abbey, married in the Abbey. I am a Romsonian, and you see, the people of Romsey say our Abbey, because those wonderful townspeople at the time of that disaster, Henry VIII, bought the Abbey. That, I think, was because the Bishop William of Wickham, when Bishop of Winchester, let the people of Romsey have their church and use a part of the church for theirs. I don't think the Lady Abbess liked it one bit, but it was the people's church, and so it became our Abbey.
You could say that the town grew up around the Abbey, and that when the Abbey was founded, the reason for the existence of the town was that it should serve the Abbey and the community of nuns who lived here.
It's still doing it. It's a working church, isn't it?
It's a working church, a very busy parish church.
This lovely quilting work is a familiar sight in the Abbey. The Romsey quilters are hard at work preparing for next year's Abbey Festival. June Thorpe is in overall charge of this skillful work. Now, what are you doing here?
Here we're making a strip quilt which is going to be raffled at our exhibition next year. We're having a large exhibition here in the Abbey, and the quilt is going to be raffled on behalf of the Wessex Children's Cancer Trust, where they're going to build a new unit in Southampton for the children.
Great. So someone's going to be very lucky if they get this.
Somebody's going to be very lucky, yes. It's being made with great love and all the different pieces of fabric. It's a sort of scrap quilt, yes. But pulled together, coordinated with the blues and the pinks, which makes it that much more interesting. And
how many members have you got?
We've got 150 and a waiting list.
Good.
So that's pretty good, and it's a wonderful, wonderful group to belong to. I think probably it has tremendous therapeutic qualities. People who come join in, they perhaps are a little bit shy, they meet people who are, we're all united in the common interest in textiles, and we do widen our horizons beyond patchwork and quilting.
All down the centuries, both in sickness and in health, pilgrims have come here to pray. So it must surely be appropriate for me to sing here for the first time a really gorgeous new setting composed by a highway viewer, Philip Wilby, of the lovely 16th century prayer, God be in my head.
God be in my head and in my understanding. God be in my eyes and in my looking. God be in my mouth and in my speaking.
In real life, my distinguished friend, the actor, writer and director George Baker, has grown so fond of the area that he's rented a cottage nearby. George, what do you make of Inspector Wexford?
Well, I enjoy him very much indeed, Harry. He's a nice man. But the nice thing I think about him is that he has one sense of humour, but also has a bit of a temper. He's not just your stereotype detective, I think. At least it's the way Ruth Rendell has written it. Whether I play him like that, I don't know.
What does she feel about it?
Well, she's enjoying very much having Inspector Wexford on the television. Yeah. By the way, she tells me that he's an atheist.
Oh, is he?
Yep.
And you're not, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm a Christian. So we have a little dichotomy there, but I take no notice of it.
Good.
And neither does he, so we get on very well. Yeah.
And of course, George, you were inspired by somebody locally, weren't you?
Yes, I was, Harry. Yes, it's my little church in Nursling. A young man, about 26, and his wife, 24, died. Can I read you?
I'd love to hear it, yes.
It's called a personal testimony. I came to the Lord, like a lot of other Christians, when life's pressures became too hard to bear alone. In my case, it was the impending death of my wife, Pamela, through cancer. The hopes we had of a full recovery were fading fast when Pamela became paralyzed from the chest down and totally bedridden. Although we had many friends and family, we had never felt so alone in our lives. I would disappear on a Sunday morning to ask the Lord for help to bear the heartbreak. But when asked, "Where have you been?" I would answer, "To see a friend," because I was afraid no one would understand and think me weak. Despite my initial denial of the Lord, I know he answered our prayers, not in the way that we had hoped, but by giving us a peace of mind that only comes from the love of the Lord. This love, my friends, shines through Christ's flock at Nursling and Roundham's twin spires. The kind words, thoughts and prayers by so many of our loving people made the heartbreak easier to bear. I thank the Lord for friends like you and for the friend we all have in Jesus.
After that moving testimony, here's another message of hope, this time in the form of song. 12-year-old Stuart Bennett is accompanied at the piano by Zoe Walters in some sacred songs by the composer Alan Ridout. Here, commemorated by this single marble slab, is the last earthly resting place of Earl Mountbatten. His tragic death just 10 years ago, when he was murdered by the IRA, severed a link of almost 60 years with this part of Hampshire which he knew and loved so well. Yet for much of his life, this giant of a man, who was a great-grandson of Queen Victoria, was serving his country both in war and peace all over the world. Earl Mountbatten is remembered with affection and respect by those who served under him in the war in the East. As they fought to defeat the Japanese, he built up morale by helping to combat the additional perils of malaria and the monsoon. Victory was achieved when, in September 1945, he received the formal surrender of the Japanese at Singapore.
The surrender today is no negotiated surrender.
This handsome house on the banks of the River Tess near Romsey was the family home of Earl Mountbatten's wife, Edwina. He continued to cherish it after her death, and before he died, personally and with great enthusiasm, planned to open Broadlands to the public. Although Mountbatten was a man of boundless energy, He loved to relax through quiet pursuits like fishing. For many years, with the Gentle River Test, this was the pursuit shared with Bernard Aldrich, head keeper of the Broadlands estate. Hello, Bernard. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
You make fishing look easy, don't you?
33 years of practice.
Yeah, but you weren't born and bred in the country, were you?
No, I wasn't. I'm a Londoner.
Now, you worked, a long time on the estate. Did you get to know Lord Mountbatten?
Oh, yes. He wasn't a great fisherman, but we used to go several times a year fishing, and we all loved him dearly.
Yeah, great shame, wasn't it?
We miss him greatly, yes, indeed.
Now, you've got a stretch of this river that's very special to you, haven't you?
So I have, yes. All that side of the river,
yes.
We opened it up and made a new beat of it, and it's named after Lord Louis. It's called the Lord Louis Beat.
Yeah.
And we opened it up the year after he was murdered in 1980, and he allowed me to call that pool over there Bernard's Pool.
Did he? That's
yes.
Great.
So that's my pool forevermore.
These quiet waters reflect a well-known tune, originally made famous by Harry Belafonte, and now beautifully complementing an old familiar hymn, What a Friend We Have in Jesus.
What a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. Oh, because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Are we weak and heavy laden, cumbered with a load of care? Jesus is our only refuge. Take it to the Lord in prayer. To thy friends despise, forsake thee. Take it to the Lord in prayer. In his arms he'll take and shield thee. Thou wilt find a solace there.
Before we come to the end of this highway, we're going back into Romsey to the Abbey to meet Canon John Hayter. These are familiar surroundings for John, for he spent the early years of his ministry at Romsey. But then he was to find himself in a very strange situation when he travelled across the world to Singapore to work with Bishop Leonard Wilson. The strange situation developed into a nightmare in 1941 when the city fell into the hands of the Japanese invaders. You were chaplain to Bishop Leonard Wilson, weren't you?
Well, unofficially, when I got to the cathedral, lovely time to arrive. It was just 2 days before Palm Sunday in that year. And there wasn't a bishop then. Leonard Wilson was appointed from Hong Kong, where he was Dean of Hong Kong, and he arrived in July. Then, when the Japs came in, this was when I was really close to him, because he got permission from the Japs to stay out of internment.
Brave man, wasn't he?
Very, very brave man. And the interesting thing about that is that he was very, very sensitive to pain. But after 13 months of freedom in Singapore, we went into the jail at Changi. The Japs thought, after a whole crowd of ships had been sunk in Singapore harbour, they didn't know that the Australians had come up with mini subs and had sunk, 7 or 8, I think it was. And they thought that this was something being organised on land, and they thought that the jail was the centre of an espionage organisation. It wasn't. They did a vast search of the jail on the 10th of October, which is the Chinese festival of Double Tenth. and they took 57 people away for investigation and brutal torture, of whom the bishop was one. And he was 7.5 months away, and the first 3 days were practically non-stop. And what worries me, seeing so many people who were finding it impossible to forgive, not just those who did the fearful perpetration of cruelty up on the railway, for instance, and we had a good deal of discomfort, but nothing of the sort that they had to endure. And we find it hard to forget what happened, but 50 years later, not to be forgiving is a little difficult, especially as the bishop, I remember him telling me when he came back from the Kempitai, the secret police, the military police, he told me how on the first day that he was taken down there, for 7.5 hours, he was under extreme torture. At one part of that time, he was tied to the top of a table with his head hanging over the end. And he told me, and I quote, "When I muttered, 'Forgive them,' I wondered how far I was being dramatic and if I really meant it. Because I looked at their faces as they stood around, flogging me in turn with knotted ropes. And by the grace of God, I saw those men, not as they were, but as they had been. Once they were little children, and it's hard to hate little children. And that was just about the perfect sort of statement which one longed to say to some of those who were finding it so hard to forgive. What was particularly sad about it was because so many people remember him as he was at the Festival of Remembrance. And he used to so remember that burly figure, that wonderful voice. And he meant a tremendous lot to the Far East Prisoners of War associations. And I remember being very touched that at his memorial service, the bishop's memorial service after he died in 1970, the Far East Prisoners of War wreath was simply our bishop. And I'd love them to be reminded of what our bishop then, when it was absolutely red hot, what he was going through, what he thought about forgiveness at that stage, because I think there are a lot of people who would be helped by that if they could cotton on to it, that forget, of course we can't. Those of us who were in Changi's internees will never forget. But very soon, I think we were realizing then that you can't go on hating. You can't hate at all, but let alone for 50 years. And the only person who suffers from hating is the person who's doing the hating. Forgiveness must be. I'm not talking in terms of Christian values necessarily, but of ordinary civilized human beings. Hatred is out, must be.
Thank you very much, John. Well, sadly we come to the end of our visit to Romsey. We found familiar and unfamiliar stories of courage here, and I've gained a sense of thankfulness for the blessings that the little-known and the well-known of every community give to us all. Next week, highway goes to Ushermore. I'll see you then.